Happy Friday and welcome, everyone. Jim Brett here at the New England Council. And we're so pleased you could join us for today's program. After a summer hiatus, our Inside the Corner Office virtual series, where we get to know some of the region's top business leaders, is back. And we have an incredible guest joining us today. But we also have had a very busy season all year long, and the fall is just as busy. We have a couple of events coming up that I wanted to mention to all of you. And next week, we'll be back in Washington, D.C. for a Capital Conversation breakfast with the Congressman from Boston, Congressman Stephen Lynch, on Thursday, the 29th. The following week, we're back in New Hampshire for another Politics and Eggs program with Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. Later in October, we look forward to Capitol Hill Report conversations with Congressman Seth Moulton, Congresswoman Lori Trahan, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. And next month, Inside the Corner Office will feature Dr. Joanne Conroy, the President and CEO of Dartmouth Health. And last, but most certainly not least, our 2022 annual celebration is fast approaching. We just announced our incredible lineup of honorees yesterday. Sponsorships and individual tickets for the event on November 7th are still available. So please be in touch if you're interested in joining us. As always, you can find more information about all our upcoming programs on our website, newenglandcouncil.com. But today, we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Udit Batra, the CEO of Waters Corporation. I first got to know Udit when he was the CEO of another New England Council member, Millipore Sigma. He joined Waters, a global leader, analytical instruments and software, 2 years ago, I believe this month. In just that short time, has led an incredible transformation at the Milford-based company. As I mentioned earlier, the company has experienced an incredible transformation under your leadership, Udit. And I read recently that it's now one of the most valuable public traded companies in Massachusetts. What's your vision for the future of Waters?
Jim, firstly, a big thanks for having me. And it's an honor and a pleasure to represent all my colleagues at Waters, right? Maybe a couple of quick words on what Waters is, and then a bit about what we think about the future, right? So if you had a cup of coffee this morning, if you had a glass of water, if you've had any sort of medicine, chances are that you've experienced the benefit of our products. We're one of the largest analytical instruments companies in the world, and our products are used to test and release and assure the quality of the food, the water, and the medicines that we take every single day. In terms of the vision for Waters, look, we strive to solve problems, difficult problems that matter in healthcare in particular, also in sustainability. And we want to create a team that has a group of people who like, respect, and trust each other. And what we also have is a simple rule at Waters that each of us knows exactly what we're contributing, meaning if the next day we left, we would be missed, not just because we were a nice person, but also because we were making a meaningful contribution. So that's the vision, and it's a company that's been doing well, as you said, over the last couple of years. But we've just gotten started on delineating the challenges that we want to solve. Some in healthcare, as I mentioned, especially to advance and speed up cell and gene therapy through advanced analytical techniques for early detection of diseases through diagnostics. I can go on, but
Yeah.
stop here.
Yeah. Well, we're going to spend more time on Waters, but we always really begin our conversations by getting to know who that CEO is that we're talking about, more so on a personal level. So tell us a little more about you and your personal background. I know that you moved to the United States from India as a very young boy, but tell us more about how you came here.
So, Jim, three things that you ought to know. Number one, I'm super lucky. right? My dad, at the age of 45, decided that he wanted to bring the family to the United States, and he applied for a PhD program at the University of Delaware. And so we joined him a year later. So none of this would have happened had he not come, right? The courage to do that at the age of 45. My mom taught me how to get through very difficult times, as any immigrant has. So our story is not any different, but to remain focused and to remain compassionate during the times. And thirdly, I'm blessed with a wife who's my co-CEO. I mean, these jobs are difficult. They're and she's my toughest critic, but my biggest supporter. And then I have two boys who never take me seriously, right? So that reminds me that I'm still normal. I'm still in touch with my friends who know me for what I am and not who I am, and they still make more jokes at my expense than anybody else does. So I'm in touch with them all the time. So I'm very lucky, right?
Mhm.
Second, I've had the chance to work in many countries and get educated in many countries, and gives me a chance to understand a different person's point of view, irrespective of how they look, how they speak. I grew up and I went to school in the UK. I went to school in Nigeria. That was the best part. Nigeria is a blast. It was at the time in the early 1980s. I had a chance to work in Japan, in Switzerland, in Germany, in Australia, different parts of the US. And I'm blessed to be able to do that because that gives me a unique vantage point and to be able to relate to many types of people. And lastly, I love this job because I love solving problems. I'm an engineer by training. I have a PhD in chemical engineering, and my love for engineering really comes from having had the opportunity to build a transformer to run an Atari that my dad had brought from London, and it needed to be started. So my love with engineering started then. Fortunately enough, I had the chance to pursue it down the line, and so really at the end, I think the most important thing you need to know is I'm very lucky, and there's a lot of people who help me do things that I'm trying to do these days.
You just answered a couple of my questions. What spurred your interest in pursuing the career in engineering and in science? And you mentioned,
Yeah, it's a love for problem solving, and I
yeah,
don't think
right,
we know.
right.
I don't think we know very early on. Nothing is
Mhm,
really deliberate, right? So I grew
mhm,
up in India early on, and if you were good in math and science, you pursued either engineering or medicine. I was no good in biology, so I pursued engineering. That's number one. So not really
mhm,
deliberate, but just sort of decided. The second, and I take you back to that story on the transformer. My dad basically brought this Atari. I think some of your
right.
slightly older audience might remember the video game consoles used to be Atari and Pac-Man and the like.
Mhm,
They brought this
mhm,
Atari from the
right.
UK, and at that time it required 8D batteries. These are the biggest ones to run it for about an hour, right? And if you're an eighth grader, I mean, you don't have enough money to keep refurbishing it to run it for an hour. And he'd forgotten to get a transformer. This is stuff that you plug into the wall to convert AC current into DC. And not being such a good student, I still interested in playing video games, and I went to my electronics teacher at the time. And I said, Mr. Gill was his name. I said, Mr. Gill, would you help me build this thing called a transformer? Because my Atari is sitting there in my living room and I can't use it without running out of all the money that I get from my allowance. And he was kind enough to help me after school in building a transformer. As I said, I was not a great student, and the deal was that if he helped me with that, I would teach the other kids how to do it. So we had this deal, and that somehow helped me understand that you could take a practical understanding of engineering and help you do and solve meaningful problems. At that time, my meaningful problem was running this Atari, and one day to the next, our living room became the second most popular destination in our neighborhood after a cricket field. So yeah, that's where it started, and I love what I do. I
Mhm.
think engineering helps you sort of structure your problems, but it also gives you an understanding of what all you don't know. So
Yeah, right.
it's
Yeah,
a blessing.
yeah. So your career path and how you got there, you you talk an awful lot about people helping you along the way. Um, I think some people miss that opportunity that you've really been, as you say, you've been fortunate to have these people as your, shining light and guiding you in your future. What advice would you give to some young people today who are interested in that type of a career?
Yeah, Jim, I think you need to keep three things in mind. I mean, at least I would. One, you have to invest in your competence. That's a given, right? You got to work hard at whatever you have. But there are two other pieces, right? You have to remain curious, right? You have to keep asking questions. How can I learn something? And I'll give you an example. And the third piece is you have to have the courage to take the risk. These things are not just offered randomly. There's a point in time somebody says, "Hey, you got to go to Switzerland, or you got to go to Australia," and you can't be waffling there and saying, "Oh, geez, I don't think I love going. I love the shopping here. I love the grocery here." You got to take a risk, and you got to go learn something, right? So, on the curiosity part, look, I was a scientist, right? I have a PhD in chemical engineering. I was working at Merck, really enjoying myself. One day, one of our biggest programs, and you remember the drug Vioxx, right? It was well around that time I was working on another drug for Merck. We'd been working on this for years, and I'd come up with something interesting other people had, and we were all invited to the head of R&D's office for an announcement, right? And I mean, this was going to be the next blockbuster for Merck, so we were all super excited to be working on it. And the guy invited us in. We all sat down. Me, being one of the more junior people, sat against the wall. The others were around this big table. And he said, "Guys, sorry, but we'll have to kill this program." And I was shocked. I said, "The last year and a half of my life has been spent trying to solve this sort of crazy thing to get this drug to many, many people." And he said, "Why don't you listen to this VP of strategic marketing?" And this lady got up, and she, within 15 minutes, showed us market information, clinical information, and translated that, and convinced all of us who 15 minutes earlier had walked into the room saying this is the next best thing to sliced bread, that we should not be launching this drug. It had to do more with its efficacy versus the market leader, and how this would not be such a great idea and such a great investment for the company. And I said, "You know what? I got to go and understand how she did that." Right? It was a bit of finance, bit of accounting. So I started taking classes in the evening, and I was curious about that, right? Yeah. I started taking classes in the evening in finance and in accounting. And at some point I said, "Oh, I think I want to go into this world. I want to understand what this business stuff is about." A bunch of my friends had gone into consulting. I applied into consulting. And the first time I applied, they have a very rigorous interview process. I failed. They say, you're not going to be able to come and work, right? And persistent as I am, I've just been married. My wife said, "Look, you're a scientist. You have no idea about this world, about this business world. Let me teach you how to get your practice." And she practiced with me on the interview protocol. And long story short, I got into that same place that had rejected me a few months later, and my business career started. But it required the curiosity and then the courage to say, "You know what? So what if I'm just a deep scientist and I don't understand all these other things? I'm going to learn." And I started at the bottom of the totem pole and worked my way up in a different profession. The same thing happened when my boss at Novartis offered me a job in Australia. Right, we were very happy in Switzerland, and we had a young child. We had two kids, two young boys, and the youngest one had just been born. And he said, "This is an opportunity for you to learn how to be a general manager. You can be a leader of an organization." And I said, "I don't know what the heck that means. I've only led teams of 4 people." He said, "Well, go to Australia. It's far away, 400 people, and you'll learn how to do it, and you won't be bothered by headquarters." Thought about it for a while and said, "Yeah, it's a risk, but why not?" I think those are the two pieces of advice. I would give, apart from investing in your competence, be curious, but also have the courage to take a risk at the right time. Don't sort of keep postponing, and don't sort of just making excuses.
I can see why your wife is your co-CEO. Great advice, though. Great advice, yeah. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about Waters and some of your current priorities and initiatives. And for those of us who joining us today may not be familiar with Waters, just tell us a little more about the company's products and services.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, if you've had a glass of water, if you've had any medicine this morning, chances are you've been influenced by our products. We're roughly 8,000 of us globally, spread all over the globe. A good portion in Greater Massachusetts, in Milford and in Taunton, but also around the rest of the country. Roughly 30% of our business is in Americas, 40% in Asia Pac, including China, India, Japan, and then the balance of the 30% in Europe. The products really are analytical instruments. And so let me give you an example, right? So when you take a medicine, we have to assure that each time a tablet is produced, it's got exactly the same amount of medicine and exactly the same amount of inactive ingredients, and it hasn't degraded in the production process, and its identity and its stability is the same. Our instruments help you identify and characterize those that medicines. And what is even more important is that the FDA trusts the data that comes out of our instruments, because the leading software in the industry that is used to assure people that you haven't changed any of the cells. So for instance, one of the big problems in regulated spaces is, how do you assure that the testing has not been adulterated with? Our software allows the FDA to gain that confidence, and it's a leading software in the industry. So instruments, software, roughly 80% of the drugs that were filed last year to the FDA came through our software. We have a leading team. So as you think about instruments and software, as you think about medicines are going from smaller molecules like Lipitor to large biologic cells that are used as therapies, mRNAs that are used as vaccines. These are very different. So we have a chemistry team that makes sure that our consumables business moves along with the medicines, and we have a leading service engineering, leading set of service engineers. And that's a very simple description of our business. We are in the business of taking very complex instruments, simplifying them so that they can be used in high volume applications in regulated settings. Mouthful, but the example is medicines, right? And the assurance of medicine that you take comes from the reproducible data that is produced from our instruments.
You first joined Waters at the height of the pandemic, so certainly taking over as a CEO of a large corporation is never an easy task, to say the least. But can you talk about the added challenge of doing so during the pandemic, and then how did you approach a new role during such a, needless to say, a challenging time?
Yeah, again, I go back to people, right? I mean, Waters has a culture that is very welcoming, right? So a new CEO coming in smack in the middle of the pandemic, and the folks there. I mean, I spent the first 6-8 weeks just on video conferences with folks around the globe, right? Our teams, our customers, our investors, board members, other stakeholders. We were not traveling, so I was like morning to evening just digesting a lot of data. The team was generous enough to spend that time, right? And it was a fast learning process. And once we had learned, then we together came up with a plan to sort of take the company back to the strength that we've always had in the past. But the most important thing was that the company was welcoming, and I could come in and learn rather rapidly. Secondly, we were very sure right from the beginning that the priorities were in this order. Number one, wanted to make sure our teams are safe and their families are safe. During the pandemic, and it seems like it was a long time ago when it started, but you remember those times, and we were all worried about our safety, our family's safety, and we said this is the number one priority. Second, we have unique capabilities at Waters to help people advance medicines, advance vaccines, and we wanted to make sure these capabilities came to bear for public health, right, without thinking about the revenues. And third was to keep the company viable, right? So how do we make sure that we're bringing people in responsibly, keeping them safe, doing the right things for public health while making sure the company makes enough profit? And at the time we were struggling, right? And we really had to get our commercial momentum back. We spent a lot of time thinking through that. The team did. We got our commercial momentum back. We went from, I would say, the bottom of the league table to amongst the top performing in our peer group. And there's some pretty significant competitors. And it took a lot of effort from the commercial teams, from the marketing teams, from the supply chain and the manufacturing teams. And I feel we are as strong as ever. As a company, we support each other. But I think joining during the pandemic, it would not have been successful had it not been the welcoming culture that Waters had. And I had nothing to do with it at that time. I hope it's still welcoming, given that I've been here 2 years.
Now, 2 years later, a hot topic facing many leaders is remote work and how to bring the employees back into the office after the pandemic. So how is Waters handling this? And as a CEO, what's your perspective on all this?
Jim, this is a hot topic of the day, and I suspect more consultants have made so much money on than we can all count. Right? They made more money than we can count on this particular topic. But look, it's a very practical approach, right? So we, as I said earlier, we have a culture where we like, respect, and trust each other, and we want to make sure we can individually make a contribution. Now, during the pandemic, what's happened is with the remote work, there are certain things that we do better, right? We don't travel for nonsensical 2-hour meetings across the globe, across the country, and spend more time, as you just did recently at the airport, than you're at meeting people, right? That just makes no sense, right? So we've gotten better, and we don't want to lose that. On the other hand, in order for you to trust someone and respect someone deeply, we are still three-dimensional beings. We still need to meet each other. We say more by our expressions than we say verbally. And we have to experience it, right? So I've had the chance now to go and meet my colleagues who I had met in 2 dimensions. Many of them comment that I look shorter or taller versus what they see in the screen. I look left and right. The rest they keep to themselves, thankfully. But you get so much out of the 3-dimensional interaction. So I firmly believe that we need that interaction again. So what we've done is a very practical thing for now. We've said, look, we're going to keep investing in our safety. We've invested a lot. We're going to keep monitoring the public health challenges, but we would like colleagues to come back, and some were already there 100% all the time, right? Manufacturing, supply chain, R&D, certain functions. But we would like everyone to spend 2 to 3 days in the office and meet your colleagues, collaborate, and then we'll take it a step at a time, because lots has changed and a lot hasn't changed, right? And we can't distinguish between those 2 things at this point. What has changed is, there are more efficient ways of working. What has changed is that we have started to have a balance in our families that was very different, right? The pause allowed us to sort of think through the priorities for each of us, and we are reluctant to sort of let go. But there are also some habits that have crept in that we probably shouldn't have, right? So we have to separate those things, and we have to give people the time to do it. And then on the other hand, the advantage of and the productivity that you gain by being together is something that we have to revisit. So we're very practical, Jim. There's no theoretical sort of construct to say we're going to be 100% tomorrow. And if not, this is going to happen or that's going to happen. We said, look, 2 to 3 days a week, we're going to monitor things step by step and work together with our colleagues to come up with a way to transition from how we work into the new domain and let the new domain come. What's the rush? I don't understand the rush, when people are proclaiming left or right? So there's no rush at this time.
One of the biggest challenges that I hear from so many of our members about is the struggle to fill open positions. You've been vocal on the need for talent, especially in the areas of manufacturing. This is a problem many leaders are facing, but what are you doing to fill that pipeline?
Yeah, Jim, really appropriate point. And look, I mean, our company has gone through a significant change in terms of demand for our products, right? We've gone from being a 1 to 2% grower to a 16% grower in 2021 and a 13% grower in the first half of this year. I mean, really significant demand, and we'd see no end in sight. And that means you have to have not just commercial folks, you have to have good, solid talent in manufacturing and in supply chain and in distribution. And we were finding it very difficult to make sure that we retain the staff without burning them out, right? And that's still a challenge. So we convened public officials, as you are an expert in this area as well. I think collaboration amongst the public officials, academic institutions, and industry is a must, right? And so we convened all 3 stakeholders, several heads of local universities, several of our members of the manufacturing caucus, and us as Waters. And we said, okay, how can we solve the problem in manufacturing, in particular, and machining in the local area? And we've come up with several programs, including training, including incentives to bring people from other locations to get them trained while we're going through this challenge. So a lot of initiatives, and it's just started, and also grassroots training, right? And students who don't want to immediately pursue a 4-year university, what vocational education can we give them? What apprenticeship can we give them? They seem like motherhood and apple pie, but unfortunately our country had lost focus on these things and lost systematic programs. And so we're reviving those. And I'm really grateful at the help that we're getting from our local universities and academic institutions, as well as the public officials. I think everyone's going in the same direction, but really it's not done yet. We need everyone's help to make sure that we're able to supply the labor and expertise that we need for advanced manufacturing to stay in the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah. We've also seen a heightened and long overdue focus on workforce diversity in recent years, and I know that this has again been a very top priority for you. So, can you tell us some of the initiatives in place at Waters to foster diversity, inclusion within your own workforce?
So, Jim, being an immigrant, being a person who looks a little bit different than many of the executives did when I was growing up, I have experienced the frustrations myself when you don't get the opportunity that you might think you deserve. And there might be other reasons why you're not getting them, right? Sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit. I don't want anybody to feel like that. Not a single person at Waters should feel like that, right? And secondly, and how do you overcome that? Secondly, you take a look at your own population, right? So from a diversity standpoint, we want to be a representation of the societies we're in. Otherwise, we will not exist over the long term, right? And I mean in terms of the composition of our workforce. So in science and engineering, there are roughly 50% female graduates every single year. Our company is one of the better placed, but still in the mid 30s to the high 30s, depending on the level of the management, right? Why isn't that number 50%? Second, especially in the Black and Latinx populations, we're woefully underrepresented, right? And on that one, basically what we did is we said, look, we're going to make some drastic moves, right? And some grassroots and some drastic, and I'll give you an example of each. On the grassroots side, we created a program called the Waters Academy, where we brought some high school students, really incredible students. Last year, we started the program last year, and we ran it again this year from the Burke school system. And their principal, the superintendent of that school system also came and saw us. Basically, there were 8 students who came in, and they would have otherwise not had an opportunity to get an internship at a company like Waters. So we've created a custom-made 6-week immersion program, not really an internship, an immersion program where they went through all the different departments of the organization: sales, marketing, service, R&D. I wish I had such an orientation program, and I had the opportunity to spend about 15 minutes each one-on-one at the end of the summer with them. This year we had 18 kids from other high school systems. And you know what? It's incredible what you learned. I learned more than I think they did in just watching them, and the questions they ask you, and they seem rather sort of simple questions, but they're very difficult. They'd say, what advice would you have given yourself, given your 16-year-old? What mistakes have you made? I said, too many to count. It was wonderful. I mean, they had me stumped so many times. And that's sort of a systemic program at a grassroots level, because I believe if you don't start there, you can't make changes. Second, at our leadership meeting at Waters, these are the top leaders at Waters, roughly 80 to 100 of us get together every year. And when I saw the composition, I said, look, this is not acceptable, right? We don't have enough women, especially women from Asia. We don't have enough Black and Latinx colleagues. And the team said, well, there's strict rules. We invite people at a certain leadership level. I said, I don't care. We will go deeper. And so we went as deep as we needed to in the organization to make sure that there was an overrepresentation of colleagues, right? So people who are much deeper in the organization than you would have otherwise expected at these leadership meetings. It was not only vice presidents and senior directors, we went all the way down until we reached a certain point. And my team said, you create an issue, and maybe what about the others who are at that level? And I said, look, if you don't make radical moves, if you don't make moves yourself, all the talk is for waste, right? It's useless. And so we did that. And I can tell you again, the larger impact was on the rest of the leadership than on the people who were invited. And I hope to sustain that. I hope to sustain it. That leadership group remains together for the rest of the year. So really taking two very specific actions, one working with the local academic institutions, including high schools and colleges, and the second one within Waters, really taking drastic action rather than waiting for many years until the staff sort of gets promoted and we have the right ratios of people in the organization.
Do you think these high school students that you have for that 6 weeks or 8 weeks could address the long-term pipeline? Maybe some of these would be interested to say, you know what, I may not be interested in going to a 4-year college, but I may be interested in a 2-year community college and maybe work at Waters in some of these manufacturing positions that I was exposed to.
Jim, no question about it. No question. We already have it, right? 2 out of the 4 seniors that I spoke to last year, and I wanted to ask them, do you want to go to a 4-year college? What do you want to do? 2 out of the 4 want to go to a VOTEC school, and they did. And 2 went to colleges, right? What was interesting is that they didn't know all the opportunities that they had available to them. So we talked a lot to them about the scholarships and the funding that they could get in order to go to many universities, right? And they said, no, I want to go to this one locally, etc. And we said, well, why don't you go to the top institutions in the country? And they will give you financial aid, they will give you funding. And they had no idea. Whereas the ones who also wanted to go to VOTEC, we introduced them to different manufacturing colleagues. I would say last year, we were just learning. This year, I think we have a well-oiled machine, and our intention is now to roll it out across the country, right? And make sure that we are in every community that is relevant for this. So no, point well taken, and that's a pipeline.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned earlier about the importance of collaboration, with the business and the government and academia to address the pipeline and the vacancies and the job openings. What about some example of how you've been able to drive innovation and growth since joining Waters?
It's near and dear to my heart. So many different examples. The one that I picked is the one that we have with University of Delaware. We've set up a collaboration of one of a kind. We've taken one of our laboratories. It's called an Immerse Lab, a collaboration center. We set it up right on the campus of University of Delaware. They are one of the best funded biologics manufacturing institutions in the world. And President Biden has just recently sanctioned more money for that initiative, right? So we felt that we could learn from them, their understanding of biologics production, and they could in turn benefit from us on the analytical instrument side. So together, what we want to do is make sure that cell therapy and biologics therapeutics, mRNA medicines get faster to patients, right? And through engineering interventions. And we feel that together we can do so. There's a lot of technical detail there, but I'm very excited. And President Asanis, who's the president of University of Delaware, and I sponsor this program together. I believe these kinds of things require a top-to-top interaction so that nobody feels like there are any barriers in the way. And I'm ecstatic about what we've already seen from that initiative.
Mm-hmm. Right, as you should be. I read recently that that Waters is now one of the most valuable publicly traded companies in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which obviously you feel, with great pride, as you should. But what keeps you up at night?
Oh, until recently, until my college going son who just went to college was coming in late. That's the only thing that kept me up at night. But no jokes. Only personal things can keep me up at night. I had nothing at work. But your question, I know, is based on professional topics. Like everybody else, we are challenged with the macroeconomic situation, right? We really have to think hard about what are the signals, how do we make sure that our business remains viable? How do we make sure that we are supplying the right medicines to the people and the right tools to make the medicines to the people? And how do we make sure that the company remains engaged? I think right now the macroeconomic challenge is dealing with those. And I'll remind you that none of us who are in these positions have personally experienced such a time. But the unemployment is so low, the interest rates are so high. This is an unprecedented situation, right? So we're all looking for signals. And in fact, this morning I spent about an hour with the teams looking at different signals to say, okay, is demand slowing down here? Is demand increasing here? We see no slowdown in demand in any of our segments, but I know in other segments there's a slowdown in demand. So that's one area where I feel we have no sort of rule book. So you have to really go back to fundamentals and fundamentals of economics, where there is supply, where there is demand. How do we make sure that you are managing your business accordingly? And I think if you were to pick one topic, that would be it. And the other one is on talent and people, right? How do we make sure in this environment that we all remain calm, remain compassionate? This, you read so much in the news, you hear so much everywhere. How do you separate signal from noise? How do you help your teams do that? How do you make sure that people are focused on the right topics and remain calm during a turbulent environment? And those are the two things. One, managing the business through the turbulence, and helping our teams navigate through the ups and downs. And sometimes I have a unique vantage point given the exposure to many things, and bringing that back to the teams to calm things down is quite an important.
And the supply chain, has that caused problems with you and your company?
Jim, look, it's a topic that's always still there, right? It's gotten way better, especially in terms of chips supply, especially in terms of inflation and freight. It's still not over, but I must say that we have developed new muscles across the organization, right? So I know 6 out of 7 of the top chips manufacturers, the CEOs of those companies personally. We are a very small component of their total demand, but talking to them during this pandemic, explaining to them what we do, why we do it, helped us procure supply. Second, we developed our own understanding of the chips supply chain, right? Where are the prefabs manufactured? It's mostly in Taiwan, and where do they go after that? It's to Korea and to China, and then who does the design work? That's largely in the United States, right? So how do you make sure that you form your own view of a rather complex environment? And third, with these relationships, solving problems together, right? So I can give you many examples. I mean, one chip was out of supply for a transformer, and again, my experience in building a transformer helped. And the team said, this chip is not available. How do we do it? How do we make sure that we make the instruments that we need to make? We said, okay, can we think out of the box? And literally out of the box, we designed a transformer that you actually could put outside the instrument, as opposed to having a chip inside the box. And our customers were more than happy, because the instrument runs the same, but we had to solve the problem. And it was not just us, it was collaboration with other colleagues. So I think it's not over, but I feel that the collaboration, the transparency has allowed us to navigate it. It's way lesser than it was in the past. Now, from a financial standpoint, from a company results standpoint, we were able to navigate through it very well. And our results have not suffered at all. I mean, we've grown, as I mentioned, about 13% for the first half of the year on a constant currency basis. And this is at the top end of the industry, right? So we feel very good about the muscles we've developed, but we're not complacent.
You must be very pleased that Congress and the president signed into legislation, the CHIPS bill, that really addresses the issue you just talked about, that not to rely on just Taiwan and China, that maybe, it's time for the America to step up to the plate, give them the incentive to build the CHIPS facilities. And you see already the bill is working in Ohio, where Intel is building a major new CHIPS facility there, creating jobs. But also, to me, it's a national security issue as well, that we don't rely on other partners of the world, that we do it ourselves here. So I would think that would be a very, very positive note for you.
It's a paradox, Jim, right? It's a real paradox, and one we really need to think through. One, we benefited a lot from the interdependence globally, right? I don't think there are certain components that are made in different parts of the world that we should make them in the US. I mean, it makes no sense for us. Mm-hmm. But there are certain pieces that we ought to do ourselves, right? Biologics manufacturing is part of it. Self-reliance on vaccines, self-reliance on chips to some extent at the very end of the process. Yes, I mean, those make sense, but let's not apply the rule to everything, right? Otherwise, I mean, the whole global economy will collapse, right? So we have to be very judicious about what we do. And I'm very pleased that we've done certain pieces of this. But again, being thoughtful about how much capacity is overcapacity. If there's overcapacity globally and the geopolitical trends again turn, I mean, all these industries will will become less profitable and not viable in many countries. So just have to be cautious on how fast we do what we do. But overall, yes, I mean, it's very helpful also to companies like us that we have some line of sight on supply chain. Yes.
You know, the New England Council's mission is to support federal policy that would promote economic growth here in the region. So we always like to wrap up these conversations talking a little bit about policy. So in recent years, our leaders in Washington, both Capitol Hill, White House, have focused significantly on economic growth and recovery. And I just mentioned, one particular bill, but we've seen several other developments in the last couple of years aimed at supporting innovation here in the United States. If you could offer any advice to President Biden and leaders in Congress on how we can continue to foster our innovation here in the United States, what would it be?
Oh, you give me too much credit. I wouldn't be able to give them advice. They're so smart and there are so many good advisors. I think all I would say is we benefit a lot from the innovation, especially advanced innovation, advanced manufacturing innovation in the local university, especially in the Commonwealth. But that said, remaining focused on that piece, and second, ensuring that advanced manufacturing is something that we continue to invest in. Not to make, and I'm not going to say we made a mistake, but not to let all manufacturing be painted with the same brush. There are certain things. I'll give you an example. For machining, we have machining sites in Milford, Massachusetts. We have a small one in the north of the UK, and we've tried to open some in different parts of the world so we could get some local capacity. The quality of machining that we have in Milford and the quality of machining that we have in the north of the UK is better than anyone else, hands down. And this is one of the largest benefits that Waters draws from advanced machining and advanced training. So I would just make sure that we are precise about the support that we give and what helps the innovation ecosystem, right? It's not just funding academic institutions, also funding manufacturing, right? And that's the only piece that I would say we ought to make sure that we're taking care of, and not just chips manufacturing, but advanced techniques like machining of metals and machining of instruments, something that I feel that we ought to continue to invest in.
One other part of that manufacturing chips bill, the advanced manufacturing chips bill, is there's an awful lot of money in there for research and development.
Yep.
Which I think grows the innovation and the economy of New England in particular, because we're such a rich recipient of the research and development because of the leadership that we have representing us in Congress. But I would think that would be something that many of the business leaders would be excited about.
I totally agree. I think there is fundamental research and then there's translation of fundamental research into products. And I would just argue that we should be focused on both and not just on fundamental research, and making sure we translate the innovation that we have been blessed with, especially with advanced education all across the United States, not just in the Commonwealth, but making sure that we translate it into products and let our economy benefit. And I think that piece we need to make sure that we have enough funding for. And I suspect there is, but I would want to make sure that we pay attention.
Great. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Every time I have an opportunity to hear you speak, I learn something. I'm sure I speak for all of the people that participated in listening today. We are blessed to have Waters as a jewel here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It is truly one of the most valuably respected publicly traded companies that we have, but we are blessed to have Waters here, and we're also blessed to have you as a CEO, but you have also demonstrated that you are so engaged in the community, not only being a very successful CEO, but you're also a very special CEO that cares about the community and wants to bring people along. And I applaud you for your initiatives, in particular what you're doing in diversity. It's a model for other companies to look at and emulate. But all in all, again, I just want to thank you for taking time, for being with us today, and look forward to seeing you again in the future. But all I can say is continued success and good health.
Jim, thank you, and thanks again for having me. It's really an honor.
Now you know why we selected you as New England of the Year. You know, big
Okay,
shoes to
thank you very
fill.
much.
Big shoes to fill. Udit. But thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Jim.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.